Thank you for tuning in. This is Tony Diaz, a Librotraficante, author of The Tip of the Pyramid, Cultivating Community Cultural Capital, and you're experiencing a multi-platform broadcast of Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say. And today's special guest is poet John Olivares Espinoza. John, first of all, you're a dear friend. I want to say hi to you. Thank you for coming to the radio show.
Thank you for having me. Very appreciative. You've pulled out all the stops for me.
Of,
Thank you.
of course, of course. And today we're celebrating your book, The Date Fruit Elegies, but we're also celebrating that you're an award-winning poet. You got a grant from the San Antonio Arts Department, and we'll talk more about that. And also, you will be featured at the Latino Bookstore as part of the Latino Bookstore's Texas Authors Series. And of course, folks know that that takes place every second Friday of the month during 2023, which means that you'll be spotlighting on Friday, October 13th, along with Norma
hmm
Cantu. And we're very excited about that because you'll be there, do a book signing, do a reading. Folks can take a picture with you. But I want to tell folks that, hey, if you're tuning in right now, perhaps you're experiencing this on its first hit, which takes place when we air on Facebook Live through live stream. And usually that will air first on the Nuestra Palabra Latino Writers Having to Say Facebook page. Or maybe you're viewing it on fox26houston.com, which airs some of our videos. Or perhaps you're listening to the version that Rodrigo Bravo will edit for audio, and it will air on one of our first platforms, 90.1 FM KPFT, Houston's community station. And I always like to pause there and remind our listeners that we're here because of you, and we can air high quality programming, poetry from our community by our poets talking about us in a profound way because we control these airwaves, but we can only do that with your help. So we hope that you can donate to Nuestra Palabra radio show, donate to KPFT in the name of Nuestra Palabra, and you can go to kpft.org or you can dial 713-526-5738, and we can do our part to keep the station going. But of course, you might also be experiencing this in the podcast that's created. So you can tweet it, text it, share it with folks at community centers. So hopefully you're getting this to all the people because that's what this is about. And our effort is to get poetry to la gente. So on that note, we've asked John to dive in with some poems, and he's going to share
Yeah.
pieces from his book, The Date Fruit Elegies, as well as new poems. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome poet John Olivares Espinoza. John, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to start off with this poem from the Date Fruit Elegies. It's called Falling from the Tree of Heaven. And the little context that may be helpful is that my dad is a gardener. I mean, he's retired now, and he would, I have two other brothers, I'm in the middle, and he would take us to work with him. So we'd work with my dad during the summers. So this is one of the experiences that I went through. I must have been about 15, maybe 16, um, working with my dad and my brothers. And there's one other worker in here. This is called Falling from the Tree of Heaven. I lift my weight's worth of crushed oleander leaves in a can, climb the peak of the 8-foot ladder, leaning aside the dump truck. I shake the crush out of the can like cereal out of its box. Pause, catch a breath of dry air again. Watch my brothers below. My two brothers slowly stacking branches on their shoulders. Father scales a ladder, ant-like, disappears into the tree. Menyo stands spread on two branches above him, trimming away. The Elinthus bows like locks of hair from a gardener's shears, tumble to the ground. One knocks father down. He plummets, crashes, not on the piles of branches, but slams across a line, a brick, wall knee high. I should run to him. I can't. We stare at him lying there, his body bent like the hedge clipper's handle, those same clippers just moments before he held in his hands up in the tree. Father lies stunned on the wall as his back bridges the walkway. Can you move? Feel your legs? Wiggle your toes? Questions learned from reading comic books when Batman's back snapped over an arch enemy's knee. We keep asking questions to keep from hearing the wrong answer because it's him, my father, the blue and black that is not Batman. Albert calls for Mr. Howard, the owner of the home, who limps out with a metal cane, an oxygen tank holstered at the hip, tubes running through his nose. After a few minutes and half glasses of whiskey, Father sits up against the will of his lumbar latissimus dorsi. His face shifts from red to white, as if a tomato turned to an onion before us. Father gains back his blush, as well as his thanks for his simple life, and has us resume our work. He'll return in 2 days, leaving us wondering if his spine is an iron rod or if in heaven an angel's arm is sore from its catch. So that's one poem. The next poem I'm going to read is called These Hands, These Roots. And again, this is kind of what I call a gardening poem. These hands, these roots. It's also sort of a love poem. Go on, tell me. My hands look like yours, nails clipped, filed, buffed, shined. They weren't always so. My hands were forged from gardening, working so deep in the soil they could have been roots. Fingers splintered by wooden rakes and shovels. Some gardener whose face and name get lost like loose coins in my memory's back seat told me women look at men's hands for half dark circles between their nails, which give away your blue collar status like a pair of torn jeans. This, no matter how handsome your face. I knew I had hope, but what about Lupe, whose mower chopped his fingertips instead of blades of grass, who then preserved them in an ice chest next to some plums? So I scrub, clip, and lotion my hands with aloe in fear of bachelorhood. I take pride in my hands now, but what about when the skin gathers at the knuckles and arthritis tangles my fingers for cracking my knuckles since I was 10? But until then, hold my hand tightly with yours as my other hand wipes the sweat from my brow under the perspiration of work and love and the fact I know no other way to wrestle out a life for us. And this next poem that I'll read in this first set is called Economics at Gemco. And I don't know how familiar listeners from Texas know what a Gemco is, but it's essentially like a retail box store like Target and Walmart, now defunct. The interesting thing about this particular poem is that it was used for a kind of it's not a spelling bee, but it's like a poem recitation contest in Armenia for and for children to get a better command of the English language. So they have a poetry contest, and this was one of the poems that they could have used and memorized in that. Economics at Gemco. My mother pushes a grocery cart. I tug at her blue pleated skirt. She puts her change into my hands for the old soul slumped against the wall, his gray mouth covered by a beard of wind and dirt. I place the coins into his cupped hands, and he stacks two neat columns of cents next to his seat on the curb. He nods his chin half solemnly. I turn back to mother. Suddenly, a cop, he came out of nowhere, tells me, take the money back. I brush the coins back into my palms like table crumbs as the old man, silent as those pennies, gets cuffed and hauled off to jail. I ask mom why. We only tried to help. The cop says bums make 30 bucks a week begging for change and are not too unhappy when arrested, since they get food, shelter, a hot shower for at least a week. My mother pushes the grocery cart without a word, knowing that as newlyweds, she begged outside markets for change, while dad stole bread and sliced honey ham inside.
Fantastic. If you are just tuning in, you're listening to Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say, and we are celebrating the poetry of John Olivares Espinoza. He just kicked us off with three poems from his collection, the Date Fruit Elegies, and he'll also be featured in the Texas Author Series. I'm proud to be the literary curator for the Latino Bookstore at the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. Should give a shout out to the director of the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, Christina Bailly. And every
Mhm.
second Friday of the month, you can expect a great show there. You can expect fantastic books to be in stock. But I love that you will be joining us in person. And I think some folks know exactly what to experience at a reading. Some do not. They may be intimidated. They may not be sure what it's like. You can hear John perform these in person, ask some questions, get some pictures. More importantly, I think it's wonderful that people will be able to build their family library with your book, have it signed. And one thing I tell people too is this isn't a transaction where you're spending some money and getting a product. This is more about telling people, look, I met John. We chatted about this. I got to talk to Tony there. I got to talk to Christina there. And folks will always have a story. So really, you're bringing that story back to you. So I'm so glad that people can kind of get a preview. It is different to get it in person, but I do also want to take this chance to talk about the poems because you really have this powerful eye to capture hard concrete details, and I think it makes the poem really relatable, but you're hitting so many different other levels of meaning, and there's how much of that was a story in your life. Because it's concrete, we can at least know, hey, yes, I know what that thing is, but then also plays on words and then the form as well. So, um, John, first of all, thank you for sharing that. Fantastic. Is that how
You're
you
welcome.
want to pick those images? I mean, are you looking purposefully for words that do all that, or is it more that the concrete image lends itself to that, and once you find it, it sort of reveals the rest?
I think it's a little of both. I think, I work from memory, so I think about what was there, what do I remember? What are the details that I remember that I think, writers should go? And then as I pick and choose, I think there's a bit of, I mean, I shouldn't say a bit, but there's just a lot of intuition as to
Mhm.
how those images that are in my memory that are concrete, actual images that happen, which ones work best as symbols and emblems. And so I really have to use this intuition as a poet to know which ones work and which ones aren't working. Just because it happened, just because it was a detail that I remember, doesn't mean it has to be in the poem, right? And then there's some things that I mean, poetry is fiction, right? I mean, it can be based on your life, but it's really categorized as fiction. That's why you kind of hear this idea of like taking poetic license.
Hmm.
So one of the poetic licenses in the poem "Falling from the Tree of Heaven," for example, is choosing the trees. Like I'm really bad with trees. I mean, my dad's wonderful with the names of trees and whatnot, but like the name that I chose for the tree is Elanthus, and the Elanthus, the meaning of the word Elanthus is tree of heaven. And so I ended up using that. I don't know if this tree is the tree of heaven. I did some research, and it looks like the tree that my dad fell from, which was an actual event. But I don't know for sure. But it lends itself perfectly from for the poem, because yeah, my father, as it happened in the poem, he was I mean, he's cutting branches on a tree, and he has his worker who's above him, and he's climbing too. And one thing we didn't think about is the branches that were falling, and he fell. And so this tree was high. I mean, it was very high, and I'm not even sure how how high my dad fell. It was not a short
Hmm.
fall; it was a long fall. And when my dad fell, I mean, you could imagine the first things that came to my mind. But I thought one of the first thoughts was like, "Oh my God, my dad is now paralyzed. Like the way he fell, like he's done for. Like he's
Mhm.
paralyzed. That must have shattered his spine." And it didn't. It didn't shatter his spine. I mean, he was messed up, but he was able to get up. His face went white. And he had to take a little time off work, but he was back to work like in 2 or 3
Wow. Right.
days. And so me, it's like, how could an angel not have caught him? I mean, I wish something had caught him literally because he took a bad fall. But for me, it's like, how was there not divine intervention? And so when I was researching trees and I came upon a tree that was Elanthus, meaning the tree of heaven, I'm like, that's perfect. So it's a bit
And
of a intuition.
how old were you when that happened?
I was about 15 or 16.
15 or
I
16.
think, because I referenced Batman. I referenced Batman in the storyline of Nightfall, which was later used in the Dark Knight Rises in 2000,
Right.
2012's The Dark Knight Rises. So I was ahead of the time there. So, but yeah, I was about 15,
Well,
maybe
and I
16
asked
or
because
15.
you mentioned poetry is fiction, and it's fascinating to me too because, of course, I'm a prose writer. I used to write fiction, I write nonfiction, but you're using a lot of the same elements in that in these particular poems, you are telling a story. So there's the narrative.
Yeah.
As you mentioned too, you're picking which detail winds up in that universe, uh, but lends itself to different meanings. Yeah, even the title "Falling from the Tree of Heaven." There's the Tree of Life, right? Trees have
Hmm.
this, universal, iconic meaning in so many ways, so many
Yeah.
cultures. But you're basically talking about a humble, working class family and a young person experiencing what could be a tragedy. If your father is
Hmm.
debilitated that day, are you going to eat anymore? Will you have health care? And I mean, it ties into modern day where, I could drive down Houston right now and there's any number of construction workers, Mexicanos, ¿verdad? Who are being
Yeah.
vilified, but who are building this whole state. And I see some of them walking on one piece of wood, and I'm thinking, I hope I don't witness a tragedy, and
Oh
the whole
wow.
family
Yeah.
will be, torn apart from it. So I imagine at the time it was traumatizing, but it was amazing to see
Yeah.
your father stand. How much of this was cathartic? How much did you forget that at the time and just keep working, or is this something you've always wrestled with? And I love that you have, you know, the imagery of an angel saving and all these concrete terms, but also underneath it is the tragedy and trauma involved. So is this something
I
did
mean,
you remember forever?
it is something that I always remembered, and it was I know, and I'll never forget it. And now that it's immortalized in a poem, I mean, I don't think I'll ever forget that, because it was, see, gardening can be, it has its hazards, right? And I think when my dad is a gardener, well, I'm lucky. We are lucky that a lot of things did not happen, but things did happen. So my dad, for example, will trim hedges with a, like it's a hedge trimmer, right? It's not like a chainsaw, but it works similar to a chainsaw. And that thing will catch his hand, and he'll have like these deep gashes because the hedge trimmer caught his hand, or your hand gets caught in a thorn of a rose bush. And in the poem that I just read, These Hands, These Roots, something that truly
Mhm.
happened is that one of our, it wasn't our gardener, it was another company, but we knew the guys because most gardeners are friends with each other if you're working in the same kind of neighborhood or condominium in our case. And he's pushing the lawnmower, and he's cutting wet grass, and the wet grass is clumping up, and it stopped his blade. And so his reaction is like, well, let me undo the 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 grass to get the blade going, but you don't really think that the blade is stuck and it's still on. So he was undoing the grass, and the blade just, once he got unstuck, it just
Mm.
twirled, and it cut off his fingers. It cut off the tips of his fingers, and literally his crew picked up his fingertips and put them in an ice chest so they can get sewed on later. And so there was always these work hazards that I'm glad so much did not happen to us. So for my dad to have fallen from a tree, not even like, again, a small fall, a small spill, it was, you just watched that body fall. I mean, that was very scary. And that's something that I'll never forget, because I think, to my knowledge, that's probably the worst thing that happened to my dad. And I want to say, I was the other week I was talking to a group of ninth graders, and I told them that I was a gardener, and my dad took them to work, started taking me to work when I was their age, ninth grade. The summer before ninth grade, I was 14, and nobody knew I was a gardener because I was embarrassed to tell my friends. But I
Mm.
only one person knew I was a gardener, or I worked as with my dad as gardener, because, well, he was my neighbor, or he lived in the neighborhood, and he was also a gardener. His dad was a gardener, and he worked with his dad. And his dad fell from a ladder. And I'm not sure how tall the ladder was, but I don't think it was that tall. He fell, and he was disabled and couldn't work.
Wow.
And so my dad was like, just really dodged spinal injury, because my friend's dad didn't.
Wow. And we're going to get to some more of your poems, not just from your book, but also new ones. So I want folks to know that. I am going to resist talking about each of the poems as much as I want to, because I'll get to hang out with you at the Texas Authors Series, October 13th. You'll also be reading with Norma Cantu, who'll be reading from Chicana Portraits.
Portraits.
Portraits. And I do want to mention to folks, though, that you are an award-winning writer, so that you are using the highest level of poetry to tell stories from our communities in powerful ways that still resonate. Um, Powerful way to convey our legacy, but also for our own community to deal with trauma. Would you kindly mention the award that you received?
Yeah, I am lucky enough, fortunate enough, to be a 2023 City of San Antonio project grants, or be a recipient of a project grants for individual artists. I guess an artist grantee. So yeah, it's prize money, or a grant, right? Award money to help artists. It's not just writers or poets. It's artists of all types of medias, but to finish a project. And so Date Fruit Elegies came out a while back, but it's different being a writer when you're at an MFA program and you have minimal responsibilities than when you go out and you have to work and teach and make a living. And
Mhm.
so it's taken me a long time to get to that second book. And so my grant proposal was to finish this book. I was about 2/3 of the way, and I needed some time to do it. And luckily, I received the grant, and it has been a huge push, a huge motivation finish this book, to finish this manuscript, and I am just so grateful to get that. Otherwise, I'd still be, writing it well into my 80s possibly. So I mean, those grants just make a huge difference to artists.
And I did want to mention that because it's great to see your trajectory, because you mentioned your father was a gardener. You were gardening as well at such a young age. Um, but I love that you're chronicling those stories now and getting grants based on that. And you mentioned too navigating feeling embarrassed or ashamed about it, but now to the point where you're proud and make us all proud. And it ties into to the last line of these hands, these roots from the collection, wrestle out a life. Before we go on to the next poem, tell us a little more about that line because it did resonate with me.
Yeah. I mean, at the time that I wrote the line, it just felt right. But it's looking back now, I was very young when I wrote that poem and the other poems. Very young. I was probably 21, and I think looking back now, 20 plus years later, it's about la lucha. It's just
Mm.
about working hard and striving and having a work ethic, and that's what gardener. That was one of the first lessons I learned about being a gardener with my dad, is having a work ethic. Putting
Mhm.
in your best, putting in that all you got, and knowing that you're going to work twice as harder as everybody else. And it was that line to me was sort of this, what do you call it, like a vow, a promise to my future wife, that I will work as hard as I can, but I'm also a poet, and life is going to be a struggle as that. I'm not making lawyer money, doctor money. That it is going to be, I it's like, I can promise you one thing, that I'll work my hardest, and I hope I've kept that promise. I don't know.
That's fantastic. Folks, you are listening to Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say. We're listening to the poetry of John Olivares Espinoza. And the only reason we can broadcast high caliber poetry like excerpts from the Date Fruit Elegies is because we're in charge of programming here. So we'd love for you to pitch in. So if you can, please donate to KPFT in the name of Nuestra Palabra, Latino Writers Having Their Say, by visiting kpft.org or calling 713-526-5738. Why? Because we're about to air at 100,000 watts in the fourth largest city in America, and through podcasts available all over, some more poems. So we're going to hand the microphone back over to John Olivares Espinoza as he treats us to some more works. John, hey, the mic is yours.
Awesome. So I'm going to read one last poem from this collection. And this poem seems to have also gotten some legs recently, has taken off a bit. And it's the last poem that I wrote for this collection. And it's called Spanglish as Experienced by a Native Speaker. And I wrote this poem, it's a prose poem, and I wrote this poem in response to Adam Sandler's vehicle called Spanglish. Who James L. Brooks, did he direct that? And so when this movie called Spanglish came out with Adam Sandler, of all people, I just thought that, no, that's not Spanglish. Like, it's Hollywood appropriating something else from us. So I wrote this poem to kind of take that back. So this is called Spanglish as Experienced by a Native Speaker. A George Washington quarter was a quota. 2 cuotas bought us una soda from the vending machine. We asked Abuelito for a cuota to play the video game console. No, he said, una peseta. No, una cuota. Una peseta para la máquina. He called the console a machine, like the machine, máquina, that dropped a cuota for every 6 cans mother put in. La máquina is what father had us puchar across yardas on the weekends. At work, we ate lonche. At school, we ate lunch. At home, we ate both. Keiki was served on birthdays. It was bien gacho to have your birthday skipped again. Skipiar was done to the unsolvable math problem, which was never attempted again. Half our time was spent on homework, the other half was spent watchando TV. Wacha signaled you were about to do something impressive, but foolish, like a bike stunt. Wachale is what you tell your friends. Wachale is what your friends tell you when you nearly plow into them with your bike. A bike is a bica. Uncle Jesse pedaled a bica to the grocery store to buy leche y cornflakes. Leche, not tortillas, were heated in the microwave. Un güey is a dude. Uncle Beto called more than 2 people una bola de güeyes. I secretly listened to the Beastie Boys and Uncle Beto's troca because I could turn it up full blast. Uncle Jesse pedals back from Queimar with 2 new plaid shirts. Dad's returning from his trip to the Dompe, where he left last week's garbage. Mother's fixing spam sandwiches. Abuelito pulls from his pocket a peseta, but hands me a cuota. And that was the last poem I wrote for the manuscript. That would be that first book. So I want to use that to transition into new work. And the new work that I want to read is called English as a Second Language. And I'm holding here, for those of you who are tuning into the video broadcast, is a broadside of this poem. And I'm giving away this poem free, or this broadside free, no charge, if you make it to my reading or any readings. So hopefully you'll buy the book. But if you can't buy the book, or you already have the book, please pick up a broadside from me, and I'd be more than happy to sign it for you. So this is a new work. It is called English as a Second Language. And I guess just to give some context, this is about my grandfather, who was a bracero. And this is me exploring the idea of why my grandfather spent, decades in the United States, and why he never bothered to learn English. English as a Second Language. During my grandfather's sleep, a brujo whispers into his ear, to fasten English to the tongue, rinse your mouth with black coffee poured inside a gold chalice. Rattle of clay pots fishes grandfather from the dream pond, not the fault lines jostle, nor aftershock. Emboldened, he rushes to the white man's market, hungered, barefooted for a cut of beef. Twigs, pebbles, and glass tacked to his soles like a sandal. He arrives to the meat counter. A carnicero flays strips of shoulder from a block of lamb. the butcher's apron smeared with vermilion petals. Here, only the tripas whisper the pig farmer's Spanish. The scent of dried, salted shrimp quivers the lining of his stomach. He struggles to muster his immigrant lexicon of malapropisms. Execute me, sir. His voice received as crackles of static. On this day in 1958, grandfather operates a tractor in the arid desolation of farmland. The oxen of wheels kick up dust particles into the atmosphere. Also, the sun slow roasts his arms, brown, the color of tender flesh kissed by gnats. Dusk, a cliff swallow tows a bow of lilacs across the horizon. Hunger, like English, like Mexico, is a honeycomb the bees have abandoned. In an anthology of unsettling dreams, the sun is worn on grandfather's brazos like sleeves. Out there, dusk will carol for him in Spanish. Song of the sparrow, song of the cliff swallow. And I'll stop right there for the second set.
Thank you so much. If you're tuning in right now, we're hearing the poetry of John Olivares Espinoza. He's actually reading some new works, and he'll be sharing those as well as he headlines at the Latino Bookstore's Texas Authors Series at the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center in San Antonio. And thank you so much for offering to give broadsides of English as a
Yeah.
second language, which is fantastic. I hope folks will take him up on that. That's an amazing addition to your family library. Or maybe you go and pick up some books to donate to the underground libraries. There's one there in San Antonio, another one in Houston. But that's a big treat. Also want to remind folks that on 90.1 FM KPFT, you're experiencing Nuestra Palabra, Latino Writers Having Their Say, multi-platform broadcast. You can make sure we stay on the air by donating to kpft.org or calling 713-526-5738. I do want to talk about how you are generous with your skills and help other poets, including some major figures. Okay, we're going to bring up Sandra Cisneros in just a moment. So much to talk about the poems. One thing I want people to appreciate is the irony of someone who's Mexican American taking the English language, playing with it, improving it, and giving it back to us. So even the title, that's a brilliant title because we already are said, oh, it's second language. And then the play on words with language is just heartbreaking and so clever. But then also it goes back to it could be someone's broken English. And then the whole idea of language as well. And the pieces you shared from your new work play with language at so many levels. And like you said, it was a great transition from the collection, because in that last poem as well, you're playing with Spanglish, and there's that last moment, that last line where your grandfather has the peseta and has a quarter, and even as you say that, so really wonderful ways to play with that. Here I had focused on the hard concrete images, but now you're taking it also to playing with code switching and language. Fun, hard work, or have you just been saving these up for decades?
Oh, sorry, say that again, or repeat that.
So is this just you playing with language all the time, or is this you working 23 hours a day to get this hard work, or have you just been stockpiling these cool lines over decades?
Oh, right. Well, it's funny because with Spanglish, as experienced by a native speaker, again, that was the last poem I wrote for that manuscript, and I was about 25. So I essentially at least had written an MFA thesis, right? So I was a little bit more experienced in that sense. but I was still revising it as I was sending the thesis slash manuscript out to contest, and getting kind of placed as finalist, but kind of like always a bridesmaid. And so I was always trying to improve on it, and I wrote this poem, but by that time I think I had more experience as a poet, and a better understanding with the play with language. And so with me, the peseta and the quota was sort of a perfect metaphor of this transition of language change between two generations. And in fact, it skips a generation, because my mother would be the second generation, but it's this transition of like old school, quote unquote, pure Spanish, and it's transitioning into Spanglish, from a I guess Gen X generation in America. So I kind of liked that idea, right? And I was able to use, I mean, that to me is poetry. That is the use of language and the play of language, and fresh phrasing, the turn of the phrase. But by the time I wrote English as a second language, as you're talking about how am I using images and stacking them up, like, yeah, like these new poems take me a long time to write, because the words have to be perfect, the lines have to be perfect, the order has to be perfect. I mean, that's what I achieved. They're probably not perfect to your ear, but I spend a lot of time getting that poem down. That's a poem that I think I wrote when I first moved here to San Antonio in 2018. And I worked on it for a few years,
Wow.
many drafts of
The
my notebooks.
intensity
In
of
fact,
language, that shows that it
yeah,
took that amount of time. Yeah,
yeah,
which is fantastic.
I work with memory, and I don't work with present day stuff too much, at least.
Mm.
And uh, I just want to come up with a memorable image that you're going to walk away remembering the poem. I want to achieve poems that people remember. I don't, whether I achieve it or not is something else.
On that note, I do also want to let folks know that you're very generous with those skills, because you have worked with. Do me a favor, mention some of the folks who call you a poetry coach, and I want you to say some of the names.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably a short list, but the my the first person to whom I'm a poetry coach is Sandra Cisneros,
It's awesome.
whom I've known for about half my life now. And from there, I think I'll mention Jen Yanez Alanis,
And by the way,
who's
it
a
was
fantastic
wonderful to
poem.
host her for the Latino
Mm,
bookstores Texas Author Series. Wonderful collection, and she
yes,
did allude to your help. So that's fantastic to see that
yes.
continue.
So I've worked with her and another poet named Violeta Garza. I worked with her, but these are quote unquote ventures that have started just recently. But currently I'm looking at the poems of another poet named Annie Snyder from San Antonio. But I think Sandra is my first inadvertent um, a friend whom I worked with for a long time, now, and which was the result of this book, Woman Without Shame, which just came out last year in 2022, but
Mhm.
the paperback has just been released.
That's awesome. I should mention that Sandra's wonderful. Of course, we're happy to smuggle her books back into Arizona when House on Mango Street was banned. And she is coming to Houston, Texas to do a special fundraiser for Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say, on October
Ooh,
15th. People can go to nuestrapalabra.org to get ticket information and more. But she'll be reading, of course, from the book you just mentioned. And of course, you and I are related to Macondo anyway, which which is the group
yes.
that she mentioned. And I think it's very wonderful that you work with other poets, because I want people to understand that that means that you're taking time away from your own craft, from just also the jobs you may or may not have, and your family. You're a family man, and just resting. So I hope people understand that you are then shifting your time and energy to the work of others. And I do want to say this about you too, John. I really appreciate that you celebrate the work of others. You come to the Latino Bookstore and support other writers, even when it's not your night, and that means a lot. So that is a huge contribution that you're making.
The writers you're bringing in with the Texas with the Texas Writer Series, I mean, they're just wonderful writers. I mean, and it's a new generation of writers, and each, I mean, it's funny because people might want to clump Latino literature in just one big kind of stereotypical, archetypical bag, but it's not. There's just such varied stories. I mean, yes, is of the Latino experience, yeah, absolutely, but it's just different voices. And I also want to plug in for any young writers out there, to catch these readings.
Mhm.
And if you can afford it, buy the books, because if you do this long enough, it's one thing that no one told me is that when you do this long enough, it's amazing to see a writer's library grow.
Mm.
Like a lot of these writers I knew, like Reina Grande does a lot of visits
Mhm.
to Texas, and I knew Reina before her first book came out. And when I ran my own reading series at the National Hispanic University in San Jose, I had invited her when Across the 100 Mountains came out. And now
Mhm.
you just see this like library
Mhm.
bibliography, and it's pretty cool when you buy that book every few years. The next thing you know, you've have all her books, for her or raw from all these years, because you don't really think about 20 years later. So
Mhm.
really encourage people to go to these readings, and if you can't afford them, buy the books, get
I
them
appreciate you
signed.
bringing that up. That's a great way to think about it. And we had teased folks with more poems, but I tell you what, we're going to make them wait so they can share this
Yeah.
podcast, share this broadcast. If you're tuning in after we've held the readings, don't be upset. Be happy that you've stumbled upon the radio show, that you got to hear John read some of the works, and perhaps maybe you heard it in time to attend the Texas Author Series at the Latino Bookstore, where on the second Friday of October, Friday, October 13th, John will be reading from his book, The Date Fruit Elegies, and some new works as well as giving away some broadsides,
Yes.
from, which include English as a second language. Any parting words, John?
Yeah, Tony, I have a very, very short poem. If you cough, you'll miss it. May I read it?
By
Because
all means.
my reading is on Friday the 13th, and so I have to read some horror poems. This is called this is from the new collection. It's titled Direct to Video, Prime Meridian of the Living Dead, and this is an homage to those knockoff horror movies that just went straight to video. Prime Meridian of the Living Dead. Pass me the tendons. I didn't expect flesh to taste close to corn. The end.
I love it. Thank you so much, John, for
It's
getting
my
that in
zombie
there.
poem.
I love it. And perfect for October. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been tuning into Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say. We've been celebrating the poetry of John Olivares Espinoza, reading from the Date Fruit Elegies. Thank you so much for joining us, John. I look forward to seeing you at the Latino Bookstore.
Thank you for having me on, Tony. You've been more than generous to me, more than you have to. I appreciate
Oh,
appreciate it, and Rodrigo and Roxana. Thank you.
pleasure. And I got to shout them out as well. Thank you so much to our crew, Roxana Guzman, who produces our multi platform broadcasts, Rodrigo Bravo Jr., who is our sound engineer and helps in so many other ways for Nuestra Palabra. And of course, want to thank you, dear viewers and listeners, for supporting the station. And if you can keep supporting the station, we encourage you to go to kpft.org, or call 713-526-5738 and make a donation in the name of Nuestra Palabra, Latino Writers Having Their Say, to KPFT 90.1 FM Houston's community station, so we can always broadcast great literature and poetry. I'm Tony Diaz, the Librotraficante, and looking forward to seeing you behind the book. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.